Welcome to Dollightful! I've got another digital painting to share with you all today. For those who don't know, I'm the illustrator for the game Skyhook, which is a really fun multiplayer game on Steam. It's a bit like Super Smash Bros. In that you fight with your friends on a stage, but the approach is pretty different. You use grappling hooks to smack each other around. It's really fun. I'll link it in the description box, of course. So, as you saw at the start, I had narrowed down my thumbnail to 4 color studies, and chose the one that suited the character best. After that, I move on to the line art. I'll draw straight off of the enlarged thumbnail itself, using a white layer in between so I can see my lines better. Spending a great deal of time on the line work is pretty important to me because it's good to get all the anatomy and proportions right at this stage rather than later in the illustration. Otherwise, if I jump straight to rendering, I might not notice a serious problem in the drawing and I'll end up spending way too much time fixing errors down the line, so my advice to fellow illustrators out there is to perfect your drawing before moving on to paint, if that's the way you work, of course. For example, you can see me working on his grappling hook gun right now. Mechanical things and guns don't come naturally to me, so I had to really slow myself down and take my time until I thought it looked accurate. Once I'm satisfied with that, the digital painting begins. For the most part, I only use a layer or two when painting. I'm sure you'll see a few pop up and merge over in the layers menu throughout the video, but for the most part, I like to keep it simple and just paint over my lines on a single layer. It feels more like traditional art in that sense, which I also enjoy doing. It also keeps me from becoming totally lost in a waterfall of unnamed layers, which is nice. And I always put this in the description box, but I'm using Adobe Photoshop CS6 and a Wacom Intuos 4 tablet for those who are curious. Admiral Briggs, which is the character's name, is a somewhat serious guy with a troubled past, which has turned him into the fearless sea captain he is today. So for his splash art, I wanted to convey all of that while providing a dynamic composition. You may notice the pose itself draws the eye up towards his face using the diagonal lines of his limbs. Making him backlit and placing the sun directly behind his head also aids in making his face the focal point, because of the high contrast. I was also hoping it would convey a sense of mystery. You know, because being in shadows is mysterious, something like that. Out of all the Skyhook characters I've had the pleasure of illustrating, I have to admit, this guy was my favorite to work on. If you're an artist, every now and then you'll work on a piece and have some sort of eureka moment, or when something finally clicks in your head and you see the improvement, you know? That happened to me on this piece, so I was extra happy about that. I study a lot of League of Legends artwork because I think some of their artists just produce the most stunning and incredible pieces, and I feel like I always learn something new when I pick apart one of their illustrations. So on this piece, I felt like I came one step closer to attaining that ever unreachable level I'd like to be at. Working right on top of the color study really helps me out because I can simply eyedrop tool the color I need right when I need it. It also helps me with gradual color shifts. One of my biggest problems is not giving enough color variation to each segment of the drawing. Like, if I was working on his arm right now without the color study behind it, I'd probably just make it all the same brownish color, where in fact I'd like it to become a cooler brown towards the tip and a warmer brown towards his body. It's subtle, but helps the painting, and I have to make sure and think about that while I'm working or I'll default to one color. Of course, you can tell his actual body color is white, but this is relative color I'm talking about, so it's brown. You still with me? I like painting cloth and draperies because people have been painting that for years and it feels very classic. It's not easy though because it can be very hard to predict how fabric will behave. I do lots of life drawing, so I'd like to think I can paint fabric fairly believably straight from my head, but when the time comes to really nail it, a reference photo is the best way to go. Speaking of which, do you guys want to see my reference photo for this piece? I have to warn you though, I go all out when I do reference photos. Okay, here it is. Majestic, right? I know. But really, use whatever you have to create as accurate a reference photo as you possibly can. I also looked at photos online of Eagle's talons for his feet here. I wanted to paint that nice scaly skin texture to the best of my ability. When it comes to painting metal, there's always lots to consider. How is the surface bending, and how will that affect the values I paint? What is the material reflecting? I painted blue on the parts that face the sky, for example. Most of the character is basically blocked in at this point, so I'm touching up some values and adding a few details, like feathers and highlights, here and there. Moving on to the rest of the props and the background. Another weakness of mine is texture. It seems when I paint digitally, everything ends up looking like it's made out of the same material. So I need to work on pushing the look of my materials in illustrations. This time around, I'm doing my best to make the wood look like hard, actual wood, his talons to look like real scaly talons, and the fabric to look like softer cloth, so on and so on, by changing up my painting style and the brush I'm using. I should keep in mind the shadow he's casting. When I create drawings for Skyhook, they take a little more effort than the usual illustration. Now you can see here I'm lassoing out Admiral Briggs to make him his own layer. This is because my boss, Wacom, hi if you're watching Wazi, the wonderful creator of the game, uses the layers in Photoshop to slightly animate the image. So it's my job to separate the illustration out onto defined layers. I usually end up with around 4 to 6 layers. This particular illustration has the sky, the clouds, the cannon fire, the deck, and Briggs on separate layers. I have to extend each layer past the edge of the canvas as well if it goes off the edge, so that it's not awkwardly cropped when he moves it into view. With a few more minor touches, the piece is finally done. Thanks for joining me! Let me know if you've had the pleasure of playing Skyhook down in the comments. And if you'd like to see more of my illustrations, check out my website at kmurrayart.com. Thanks for watching!